Well, welcome back, everyone. I'd like to introduce our wonderful panel now. We have our amazing moderator, Dr. Lisa Mills, who is a professor of film at UCF, Hirak Shah, who was a UCF film lecturer, Renata Sago, a journalist with Sago Creative LLC, and Maria Padilla, founder, editor, and journalist of Orlando Latino blog. So again, thank you all for joining us, and I'm going to hand it over to Lisa, who will lead our panel, and then we'll have some questions from the audience at the last 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Lila, and thank you for bringing this film to UCF. The main character, Mira, is a senior reporter for Khabar Lahariya, which in English means waves of news. This started out as a handwritten newsletter for a project to promote literacy in a northern province of India, Uttar Pradesh, and that is where Dalits and Muslims each make up 20% of the population. And Uttar Pradesh is India's largest state at 200 million people. If you can think about that as about 2/3 of America's population. So it's a very, very politically important state in India. And we join the story as the magazine goes digital and the all-female reporting staff is learning how to use a smartphone and charge it, even though several of them live in homes that do not have electricity. But this obstacle does not stop them from going after the issues that they care most about. Issues that can put them in danger, ranging from toilets to political campaigns. It has become a grassroots rural news network with at least 500,000 subscribers. I feel that every now and then a documentary comes along with a timeliness that makes all of us sort of stop and realize just exactly what is going on in our world. Democracy is eroding, with journalists facing prison, even death. 2/3 of the 21 journalists killed last year were in countries where there is no armed conflict underway. And of course, we've seen at least 2 journalists killed in Ukraine already, and the conflict there has only been going on a month. Rintu Thomas and Sushmit Ghosh, who directed this film, are a married couple, not unusual in the documentary world. The women in the story gave them amazing access to their personal stories right from the beginning, and it is shortlisted for an Oscar. If it wins, it will make history as the first film about India, directed by Indians, to receive an Oscar. We should point out that Thomas and Ghosh are not Dalits. Working from the outside of a community is also a common practice in documentary filmmaking. While caste discrimination has technically been against the law for decades, this cruel discrimination remains very much present in India's culture. Dalits are relegated to sanitation jobs in slum communities in the cities. In rural areas, their situation is even worse, with landowners treating Dalit farm workers horribly, even raping their wives and daughters if they cannot make rent. So this film raises several issues that we can discuss as a panel and with those in attendance here this evening: democracy, the importance of journalism to democracy, gender discrimination, caste discrimination, and the evolution of information in a digital age. Now, I think we need to get a couple of definitions out of the way first. What is a Dalit? A Dalit in Indian society is so low in the social hierarchy that they're actually outside of the caste system. Hindu nationalism, that's waving all of those orange flags, that is the ideology behind Prime Minister Modi's party. And you see young Hindu men carrying those machete-like knives in order to, in quotes, protect themselves against Muslims and to protect the cows from Muslims. My understanding from being in India during the state elections in 2019 is that this is an issue that never was an issue before the BJP party came to power. So we want to begin with Maria tonight. And Maria, I wonder if you could start out telling us some of the similarities that you saw in this film in terms of what journalists are facing in America and what those women faced in India.
Good evening, everyone. I love this film. And I was following it as a journalist in terms of the technique that the women are using, in terms of how they approach people, how they try to get to the stories, how they ask questions. So I'm really loving how they evolve throughout the film, from being, I would imagine, what society would expect of them in terms of perhaps being a little bit more shy, timid, not outspoken, to literally pushing to the front of the crowd with their cameras high up and asking really good follow-up questions. I love that, and I love the idea of Mira explaining to one of the women the whole idea of an angle of a story. I really, really related to that. That's really difficult to teach, I think, because it's just something that you develop over time by doing many, many, many stories. Some people come to it very quickly, and some people it takes a little bit longer. But the fact that she's even talking about things like the angle of the story, the approach. I chuckled when the man told one of the reporters about Crazy, the official person. And I thought, oh my goodness, it was sexist, number one, but there is some technique to that as well, in a way, where you approach a person before you kind of move in with a really difficult question. You start out softly, and then maybe move in for the more difficult question. So I really related to what they were doing. I was afraid for them most of the time, as women and as journalists, because they're asking very difficult questions of people who are not accustomed to being questioned. So I praised everything they do. I thought they were an amazing group of women.
And Renata, we were all talking as women about this group, these women, and the way that they supported each other, and that you really connected with that part of this film.
Yeah, it's really empowering because you see, we're introduced to this reality that in India, a journalist is upper caste, a journalist is a man. And so it's taken us almost on a journey because there are subtitles, right? We're looking and we're reading. So we're almost consuming this piece of documentary art in a way that is that in which we consume news. And so we see the evolution of this group of women through their home life, right? A woman whose husband even questions the longevity of her organization. We see that, but we also see a sense of sensitivity in their approach as women toward each other, a kindness, a gentleness, but also some very assertive actions when they're talking to each other. They're transparent, they're clear, and also with their subjects, they're persistent. And I think this is a very healthy balance of masculine and feminine energies that we are seeing in a group of women. Very nice.
Hirok, I know you did some research into the actual production of this film, and I wonder if you could share some of what you discovered about how it was made and where it might go from here.
Thanks, Lisa, for the question. Yeah, this, when I first saw, I was like, oh, this is Indian filmmakers from America, or like, but then I realized it's like a married couple, and like, this is Indian filmmakers from India. So Lisa rightly mentioned this will be the first entry of an Indian film into Oscars where an Indian film is made by Indian people, which is like long time coming. So yeah, it took them 5 years to make this film, and they were on the, so for a documentary, it said the writing, there's no writing. The writing is done on the editing table. So when you are cutting it, that's when you decide what to put in the film, what not. Before that, because you're not gonna get, you don't know what you're gonna get. So they were about to start editing, and then the COVID hit, the pandemic hit, and they were like stuck inside of their home. So it's like they were working 24 hours, and then like, it said like we were in the editing bay, which is our work, and then as a couple they would go to kitchen, start cooking, and then they're still like together doing all these things. So that was very interesting, and then I think it was very challenging. And then the other thing was, Lisa and I were talking before, this is like a shortened version of the film, 60 minutes. The original film is 90 minutes, and we were not like, some people find it boring. Some people find, oh, I want to see more. Like, what happened to that girl? What happened to the other girl? So their first cut was 5 hours, and they had to, and then it's again like a couple stuck in the house doing other things. So they had to get an editor from Germany who worked on an Oscar-nominated film in 2017. So that person helped them bring it down to like 90 minutes. So a very interesting story, very admirable story.
When all else fails, hire an outside editor. Maria, I wonder if you could tell me what surprised you most about this film or characters in this film. What surprised you? What weren't you expecting?
I guess their perseverance. They have tremendous odds. They're up against tremendous odds in this film and in their personal lives. And for them to continue to to be journalists and to push to be journalists, I would have wanted to find out a little bit more about their newsroom. I was very intrigued. It looked like a very modern newsroom. I would have wanted to see how they set that up, and how they talked about how important it is to be a journalist. There was a couple of things there where they talked about how, if they're not pushing, then it just becomes like any other media company. And I remember thinking, ouch, because we all know how that has gone down here in the United States. And also, there was another part where she talked about being grounded. You have to be grounded. You have to be at the ground level to report. And that's very, very true. I find that all very, very true in my own experience.
I couldn't help noticing that when they were sitting there together in their newsroom, there were barrels of chemicals behind them. I don't know if anybody else noticed it. It looked like maybe they were in a warehouse of some sort, sitting on the floor, and there were stacks of supplies all behind them. I mean, who knows where they're actually having to do this, but they've got it together. They've got
And
their
they went digital,
mobile phones.
which is amazing to me, because if you compare it to American journalism and American newspapers, well, it took a long time for American newspapers to go digital. And not all of them are even fully digital. So for Mira to recognize immediately, oh, we have to get phones and we have to start doing this digitally and we're going to expand our audience, I thought that was an amazing moment that she grasped that right away. It's very smart.
Renata, I've always felt that a good documentary always, it's part of its job is to make the audience feel uncomfortable in at least a few moments. Were there any particular parts of this documentary that had you kind of feeling uncomfortable or worried?
It opens with this preface about what these women are up against.
The rape, she's asking
Well,
about
yeah,
the rape.
just with the industry itself. I mean, we're talking about women who are Dalit women, so these are considered the untouchable caste in an industry. They're completely outsiders, and so we see them building this from the ground up. I had wondered when she went into that room with the officer who is responsible in many ways for providing safety, and I don't know, we would have to have another conversation about what that looks like in that context of that specific community. But I was like, ooh, I was kind of worried, but then I said, ooh, she pushed back. And it was, again, really empowering. There were instances in which the women themselves were serving as intermediaries between law enforcement and the community, and they were also, seemed like they were also doing a little bit of civic engagement themselves.
I like the moment when she comforted the man whose daughter had been raped. That was a very human moment.
Yep, wonderful.
Hirak, what does this film say about India in terms of a country that loves to brand itself as technologically advanced?
Oh, that's very interesting. I don't want to get in trouble. I think this is again goes back to like the selective opportunity in a country like that. We all know that India has like a colossal gap between the rich and the poor, but also there are success stories, and there are stories like the guy who wrote India's constitution was a Dalit, and so there are like things like that. But it's definitely getting there. It's definitely getting better. And for somebody who grew up there and seen both best of both worlds, something like this will definitely help the grassroots people and the people who do not have the opportunities to show their voices. And there are instances in the film as well that they distribute the phones, and then they're talking about like, oh, I can like give you the power bank, I can do this, I can do that. It's kind of like a great, like, it's kind of like you're looking back at this, that like I could have been in that situation, you know, if I didn't have that opportunity. So.
And some of these women are educated. I mean, Mira's got a graduate degree, and so I think that shows us that they have they've got the perseverance, and they found a way to get their education as well. So it is possible. They definitely have some avenues that they can take.
Yeah, definitely. It is. The progress is very, very tangible. Like she got her degree while she was doing this, and yeah.
Before we go to questions from the audience, I just want to ask each of the panelists to address this final question I have. I wondered what comes out of this film that makes you hopeful that journalism and therefore democracy can and will survive? What hope do you take away from this, Maria?
I think it's very hopeful that you have a group of women not of a higher caste or of higher socioeconomic class doing this sort of work in a country in which the role of women is very, very defined and also quite limited. So I think that's extremely hopeful that there may be more people in other places who do something similar, that you don't have to have necessarily a degree, although it's great that she does. Here in America, journalism did not require a bachelor's or a master's degree in order for you to exercise it. But then it became that. I mean, it used to be that you had a good high school education and you were a good writer or at least inquisitive. You could do it. You could, take a swing at it. And then it became, well, no, you have to have a bachelor's degree and maybe even a master's degree. And that sort of cuts out a lot of people who might actually be born into it. As I think, Sudita, I think she's a natural. And so is Mira. It's absolutely natural for this job.
Renata, what gives you hope from this?
Those views, the counts were going up at the end, so we're able to see, I love a good story where we see somebody's evolution. I think that's the hope, that whatever your situation is, you're not stuck and you're supported. We see a group of women supporting each other. They have the support of technology, of these platforms that exist, and they're building community. They're participating, they're documenting the electoral process. They're literally shaping policy through questions to some extent.
And they're craving and using technology, right, Hirok? What do you have to say about what this tells you about the future of your native land?
Well, in terms of at least, there's a lot of issues being discussed, which are like the social issues and political issues, but coming back to the democratic process and like the film itself, think of it that when we know this film, hopefully it wins this Sunday, right? But the process is that a country sends an entry for something like Academy Awards, and we all have our different sort of opinions about what the Oscars, which film they choose and whatnot. But can you imagine like the Modi government, the government who sends the films, the office who sends the film, would they let it go here? Like, do they want? Because this is the kind of portrayal. India is being portrayed like this, so they would not. But the democratic process that Academy is now going forth, which is they directly nominate films. So we went, some of our students went to see Oscar-nominated shorts, and there was only one English-American film. They were all, it's a mainstream category. There was a film from Japan, there was a film from Poland. So I think it's a great step forward. And this, just that we are able to watch this film here is a big step.
Well, we'd like to ask you to ask us any questions you might have or spark a discussion from here. But, Lila, how do we make this happen?
Does anyone have any questions? I'll bring you the mic. Just feel free, raise your hand. There's lots to discuss here.
Thank you, everyone, for your thoughtful comments after the film. I was wondering, does anyone know how the paper is funded, where they get their funding, how they went digital?
I looked into that, and the best information that I could have, and gleaning it from interviews with the filmmakers, was that there was originally a philanthropist behind the newspaper. It was a literacy program. But very shortly after that, they tried to become self-sustaining through subscriptions. And so now that's why it's important. Maybe we could go out and subscribe to their channel now, because that is the way they're supporting themselves now, is through the subscriptions.
Hi. Thank you again for your comments. This is regarding the angle comment that there is. I was actually quite taken aback with that, because when she says that you have to go with an angle to the story, isn't that an influence of somebody trying to get them to be on a certain angle to a story? Because if the story has to come out, it has to come out independently, because she says that makes the other person look like what was the word she used?
She said that the angle she took was promotional.
Yeah, it becomes, rather than, so she said that if the story that you said would make it a promotional, and we are going for this angle. So isn't that a form of influence?
That's a really fine line, but in journalism, basically, you try to walk that neutral path, supposedly, where you're not going to be for or against anything, but you're definitely not going to necessarily promote something. And here in this country, the promotion, this is very different, when they don't use press releases. They're not using press releases. Here in this country, a lot of news has become overly dependent on the press release. And the press release is somebody's point of view. It is whoever put that press release out, company, politician, what have you. And then you got to dig deep and find out, well, what's the real story here? That's what she means, for example. What's the real story here? Often in my experience, the story is not in the press release, number one, or if it is, it's in the last paragraph of the press release. So you have to dig and find out what is the real thing that is captivating about this, or that is newsworthy about this, and not necessarily what somebody wants you to put out.
Okay. Oh, I think the angle question, I had thought about that, and there's a great reality is that there are institutes asking those same questions that you are asking, and there's a lot of challenging within the industry itself. But I was going to say that I wondered who would be telling these stories if these women weren't. Who would be telling these stories in this community? And so I thought about the origins of a lot of institutions here in the United States. Early journalists, they really were documenting because they had no choice. There was no one who would tell the story.
But it's the influence that I was talking about.
Yeah, they were influencing.
Yes, like,
Yeah.
she said it, that because she told the story the way she wanted to tell it, or what she saw. But the other lady was trying to, Nita was trying to tell her, this is the angle we want you to tell the story from.
Yeah,
What she was actually saying also, don't take everything that they tell you at face value. So this guy has is claiming all kinds
quick, I wanted to have a raise of hands who really understood the language and were not reading the subtitles in the room. Like a percentage, so like 3, 4.
You asked again, what's your question?
Like you really understood the language, not reading the subtitles. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of things that I realized that the subtitles were slightly misleading. But sometimes they were misleading. They were a little bit kind of like edited. I don't know what the real process is if the academy goes through that or not. So coming back to your question, I think what was happening here is that the woman Shamkali and Meera, she did the story, but she just reported it as it is. And the piece of information that was missing is that all these people, the priests who do this voodoo stuff, they sexually exploit the people who go there. So the other woman did not know that. So she's telling her that if you do not have an angle in your story, then there is a problem. It's just taken as a straight up information, and then they misuse that. So she was not telling her that you have to have an angle every time, but if rather not having an angle can actually do the opposite of what your intention is. I think that's what the instant here, that's what I got from Hindi that they were saying. I think.
And that's maybe the value of doing storytelling in your own community, being able to identify, oh, you know, this is sexual exploitation from a voodoo priest versus this is journalism. Yeah.
So I have a question, but it's not really a question. But I want to talk about if you could talk about the sort of death of independent, or not even independent newspapers, but like the sort of dying of local newspapers in America, right? Small local papers that, you know, where no one's reporting on community boards and right, just they're not able to sustain through you know, print copies, and they didn't seem to make that switch over to digital, and the role of maybe social media and cell phones in India, right? Everyone has a cell phone, and so that they were able to sort of make that switch and successfully make that switch. I'm so excited. I don't know that there's a question in there, but is there any? Do you have any comment on that?
Maria, do you want to talk about your perspective on this?
Well, I think that the diminishment of local media is real. It is happening, and it's very dangerous, in my opinion, because people are not well informed anymore. And I'll give you some concrete examples. I worked for the Orlando Sentinel, which is how I came to Orlando to begin with, more than 25 years ago. And I was with them for quite a while. And when I started with that newspaper, the daily circulation of the Orlando Sentinel was over 250,000. That's a day. Daily circulation of the Orlando Sentinel today, I don't even think reaches 25,000. So you're talking about a huge plump in the circulation of the newspaper, which means that you have very, very few eyeballs that are really reading the paper. And that also spills out to television news and radio, because they rely on the local paper, because the local paper, with the journalists that it had, really covered the community. The Orlando Sentinel was huge. I can't even begin to describe to you the number of bureaus that we had, the staff that we had, covering Central Florida from north to south, east to west. I mean, it was humongous. And a lot of television news and radio, they relied on all of that, because we were putting that out and putting that out and putting that out, and so they could just come back and piggyback and maybe follow up and do something else. But now there's a whole lot less of that. So you see the, especially TV news, relying a lot, this has happened for a long time, on crime news. Everything's crime. Well, everything's not crime. And I will sort of end this comment by saying there was a county commissioner one time who told me how dangerous he felt this whole trend of essentially equity firms basically bought out a lot of the newspapers, and the Orlando Sentinel is one of them, part of Tribute Media. And he said, well, you know, it really bothered him and troubled him not to see journalists at these county commission meetings, because he says sort of like what they were talking about in the movie. When you have that presence, his exact words were, you know, you shine light into certain corners, and the cockroaches scamper. I always remember he said that, and that is so true. So when these women go out and they're shining their phone into certain corners, you know, they're getting roads built. They're getting, you know, rape cases properly documented and properly perhaps prosecuted, and so on and so forth. So it's really important. When that diminishes, I don't think the community really knows how much it has lost.
Well, I worked in local television news for 25 years, and we could do a panel on the decline of local news, you know, for 2 or 3 hours. But you could go back to the Reagan era and deregulation. You could point to further deregulation in the 1996 Telecom Act during the Clinton administration. This country's news media, its journalism, is unique in the world because it is a commercial system. In Great Britain, in Canada, in Asia, they have government support that props up their media. In this country, we didn't go for that because our founding fathers felt that that was dangerous, and so it goes all the way back to that and the fact that we have a commercial media system that is driven by the market. So when you lose a market by making mistakes like not figuring out how to garner ad revenue from your internet site, you know, you can go back to the early 90s when the web arrived, or you could go back to the 80s when cable television arrived. Journalism companies have made mistake after mistake after mistake, while all the while the government was deregulating the industry. So what we wound up with is a very weak journalistic system now, and the void is being filled by very loud voices of people that are not really journalists. So, you know, that's just a brief summary of my perspective from 1981 to 99, but it's definitely a problem. I'm a subscriber of the Orlando Sentinel and the failing New York Times. And all I can say is we really need to support our local media, because if we don't, our politicians and elected officials will not be held accountable.
Any other questions from the audience?
Good evening. So just a couple of things from this film. Thank you for showing us. This was very, very informative and helpful. And actually, I also grew up in India till about 11 years old. So some of these issues that the film addresses, it sort of goes into multifactorial levels, and it's a little bit more complex than just seeing like a 60-minute, and so number one thing was the issues about rape. It is so, I don't know exactly the statistics now, but back, a few years ago, it was so common. It's so sad to see how common it is. I don't know if you guys remember the case of Nirbhaya that happened a couple of years ago when she was just traveling on a bus. I think she was a medical student. She was traveling on a bus with her friend, and just imagine just going back home, and 4 guys got on the bus and essentially raped her and stuck a rod up her intestines and just tore them out. And she had to be flown, I believe, overseas to Singapore or somewhere. So I feel like this film sort of gives confidence to the women to maybe not be scared in that sense to go out in public, because I feel like a lot of women may still feel oppressed, being in certain parts of India. What these women are doing is a great work, honestly, and it kind of gives the other women that may feel like they're being oppressed by their husbands or their in-laws, because there's a big ordeal with in-laws feeling like they sort of have power over their daughter-in-laws, and that is a very real issue, even here in America. Some families, and it's unfortunate. And then a couple of other things that I can personally speak on this is Just simply going to the police station, for example, in India is a you don't really have much hope from the cops over there because they sort of just sit on things and you have cases of files just stacking up and you don't really see them getting things done. Like you may not have those certain cases of injustice or crimes might not get to the courts for years on end. And by the time they get to the court systems, the people may have been dead or whatnot. But like here, if you call 911 about something, it's pretty quick. You get what you need, and But over there, it's not like that. So, and this film kind of touched on that. It didn't really go into a lot of details, but you saw one of the police officers kind of like give a cop-out answer saying, "Well, I wasn't here when this happened, so it's not," and the reality also may be true, but it also could be the fact that he may have some overhead suppression from his bosses too, who may have overhead suppression from their bosses, who may have overhead suppression from political parties as well. And there are plenty of Indian movies about these issues as well. So this film, kind of touched base on that too a little bit. So I feel like it did a pretty good job, especially giving hope. I know you guys had sort of addressed about the future. It definitely gave hope to the future, especially women in India. So hopefully, we can get some good.
Hi, I'm just gonna end it on a positive note. I wanted to know what's the future for these women. Are they going to collaborate with bigger newspaper agencies in India like NDTV or CNN India for covering UP? Do they have that kind of, are they going to be upgraded from just smartphones to like cameras? Are they going to get some kind of upgrade? Do we have any information on that?
We really don't have any information, though we're hopeful. I think it's interesting that their reports are being picked up by the commercial media. Is the media in India, it is a commercial as well as a state media?
Yeah,
there's a commercial and a state media in India.
Like American system,
Yes.
but it's very influenced by where they're from or what party, like very political influence. And so there is like an Indian version of PBS there, but it's not as, I really don't know, I don't know what's really happening because it's pretty fast with the digital and the social media. But I think it's a double-edged sword kind of a situation. Because if this film really wins an Oscar, I wouldn't be surprised if this channel gets shut down. Because it could.
No, but with the media, when you say, media, you are dealing with a country with 22 different languages.
Right.
So you have not just national media, you have regional media. There used to be a government media, but there's lots of regional, and then the regional media is biased depending on which political party. We don't know what the political party for the two people who made the movie is. The movie is very one-sided. The guy Yogi Adityanath, who is the monk person who in this thing, he won the election again just last month in a landslide because the state itself has been so progressive. It has come a long way. If we go now, myself, I haven't gone for the last 5-6 years. If I go today to India, I will not recognize that state, and I grew up around that state. So because it has been, there's so much progress that has been done, and the movie was one-sided in that angle, but we were not talking about that issue at
That's important, though, I think, to talk about the function of a documentary, because there have been many documentaries called into question, how fair, how neutral is this as a piece. But what I will say is that what this work does is that it introduces us to a reality of journalists, like these journalist women, for us to do additional digging.
Exactly.
Like there are questions coming up, I'm like, I need to research,
Exactly.
and learn more from this perspective. So we see this East West kind of
Well, I have
marriage.
so Lisa has a lot of experience making independent films in India, and we have Professor Peters here also. Both of you have a lot of, so from the making perspective, what did you, like the way you see this film and your experience being on the ground, maybe you wanted to.
You're being put on the spot.
Sorry, no.
Okay.
Well, I would just say that if we go back to the definition of a documentary, there's a reason why documentary film is taught in the film program and not in the journalism program. Because this is not a news report. This is the creative treatment of actuality. And all documentaries come in with a point of view, or you could call it an angle, or you could call it a perspective. But I think that the main goal for a good documentary filmmaker is to try to show the perspective of a group of people or a person that does not have access to the mass media. So there are a lot of officials and politicians and police departments in any government institution that has plenty of access to get its story across through the mass media. Those women have nobody to tell their story. So the documentary filmmakers tell the story from their point of view, and that's what that's the definition of a documentary film. This is not a news report. So I guess that would be my angle on it. And when I went to India and made my documentary about a Dalit activist, it was told from his point of view. I couldn't cover all of the many, many angles or complexities of the issues that you raised. Yes, these issues are very complex.
I see one last question here. I know we're already past 8, but it's such a great discussion.
I was just going to piggyback on what you were saying. I came into this, like we all did, thinking this would be a documentary about journalism, but really what I settled into was a journey of a group of women who went, the way I was describing it to my friends here is they were frogs being thrown into a boiling pot of water as young women who had to learn on the fly, and to see them creep into their confidence was, to me, the best part of the movie.
I want to thank our panelists tonight, Maria, Renata, and Hirok. Thank you so much. Thank you, Nina, for bringing us this film. Thank you, Lila, for hosting it.
And thank you, everybody, for coming. Just a reminder, the full feature, the 90-minute version, will be premiering on WUCF on this Monday at 10 p.m. So you can watch that. This is the fifth of 6 films in the 2021-2022 Indie Lens pop-up season. We have one more film on April 21st. If people are not on our mailing list, I have business cards that have the website. You can sign up for our mailing list. And one of the first film in the season is a film that was also, all the Indie Lens pop-up films are on WUCF. The first film in the season was called Storm Lake, and it was about independent journalism, and is, I'm sure, still available on the PBS website, app, on Passport. So I would totally recommend. It's a fantastic film. It's about a small Midwestern town and local journalism there. So in wrapping up, if anybody has not done, Eric, do you still have that QR code? If anybody has not done the survey yet, Eric has a QR code back there that you can just, shoot on your phone and goes straight to the survey. And while two more announcements. One is the Global Peace Film Festival. I don't know if many people here went to Fusion Fest any of the years. We produced the Migration Film Contest and are looking for both subjects and filmmakers. Matt Petty was a subject in the 2021 festival. Thank you, Matt. So if anybody is interested, also take my card, email me, and I'll hook you up with the people organizing that. And finally, this is the 20th anniversary of the Global Peace Film Festival this year. We are doing a $20 for 20 years fundraising campaign through United Arts right now through the end of April. And if anybody would like to support that $20 for 20 years, you can text GPFF to 41444. That'll take you straight to a text to give page where you can make that donation, and we would greatly appreciate anybody who would like to do that. And again, thank you all for coming. Thank you, Lila, for all the work that you and the India Center have done. Thank you to the panel. It's a wonderful panel, and hope to see you at the next screening.